everybody, and welcome to the CCEA Podcast. I am your host, Kristan Nigro, and I am here today with two very special guests. I have our CCEA President, Ms. Marie Neisess.
Hello, how are you doing?
Great, so happy to be here with you. And I also have our Executive Director, Mr. John Vellardita. Welcome.
Good to see you, Kristan.
Same here. All right, so we really need to get down to some serious business. There's no fluff. We need to get right into it. We need to talk about this Jara deal. What is going on?
Well, I think we're at a crossroads with school board governance. But before I suggest what I think is at stake, maybe Marie would like to address that issue. What is these trustees about to do?
I think they're about to make a monumental decision that impacts not only educators but our students and our support professionals. And I think they need to remember that they're beholden to the voters and to the public. And right now what they're trying to do with Superintendent Jara is alarming, because 4 trustees are going to make a decision on whether he leaves CCSD with an enormous payout. And at the end of the day, I think they need to listen to the voices of everyone who is concerned about that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I agree. I can't even believe the amount of money that he's asking after the failed leadership that's happened here. It's absolutely disgusting. And I do hope that, like you said, the 4 votes that he could potentially have, they really need to look to the community on this one. What do you think, John?
Well, I think what we're witnessing is the collapse of the school board governance. We have a deal that was cooked 2 weeks ago, initiated by the superintendent, not the trustees, who essentially is trying to plan an exit, his exit, on his terms to get out of town, if you will. And the reason for that is there's just been too much that's been happening that's calling to question whether or not he should remain as a superintendent. Now, as you know, for over a year, we've been calling for this guy to be terminated, and I think Marie can speak later as to, at one point, we did have a working relationship with him, and that changed, right? But I think a couple of weeks ago, a deal was cooked, and he essentially crafted out a deal that gives him a payout. They say it's $400,000, I think it's $500,000, and he picks the successor.
Wow.
Not the trustees, but he picks the successor. And the successor is his second, Brenda Larsen Mitchell. So these trustees didn't ask this guy to quit. They didn't move to terminate him. They basically capitulated to that deal. And so what they have crafted for an agenda next Wednesday is to, consummate that deal. And so what does that mean? I mean, what we're witnessing is a school district administration in the weakest position it's ever been in years, right? A school governance model that essentially has capitulated their responsibilities to do the right thing in terms of serving these kids and making the right decisions. And so we're at a moment now where what's being proposed should not take place, and we can speak to the efforts that we're trying to make to basically derail this deal. But I think, Marie, it's probably good to kind of share with people, at one time we did work with this superintendent.
Absolutely, and we hear that a lot, what's going on with CCEA, you were his biggest cheerleader, and it really wasn't about being a cheerleader. It was about having a working relationship with a superintendent that at the end of the day is making major decisions that impact our educators and then, of course, the lives of our students. And we had him in here with our executive board on a regular basis, dealing with the issues. He was hearing firsthand from our educators what is happening based on the policies that he and Dr. Larsen Mitchell were implementing. And, initially it felt like we had a good relationship. He was taking in that information that our board members were putting out there. But at the end of the day, we realized he wasn't. It was just a facade. And then you move forward to the coup d'etat of trying to fire him. Well, we were in crisis. We had issues that we were dealing with. We definitely needed, for them to sign off on our ask of the trust of adding more money to the increase that they needed to ensure that the trust, those dollars aren't being put back on our educators, where we're having to pay more out of pocket. But, Kristan, I'd like to ask you, what are you hearing from educators? What are they saying as far as the appointee possibly being, the next superintendent being Dr. Larsen Mitchell?
Well, it's really interesting because, a lot of the times when crisis happens in our district, I don't necessarily, besides the people maybe at my site and a couple other people on the outside that I know, but my phone blew up. People know her. People know what her history is. And so a lot of people are like, oh my God, that would be so detrimental to our district. And that's scary to think about, that if this could potentially be the next successor of Jara, our school is already in a downward spiral. Like we're finally got money towards the district. We got teachers that are excited to get, hit the ground running with this, new contract. And if we have a new person come in, well, not that she's new, but if she comes and takes over, that's scary. And I don't think a lot of the educators are going to be happy with that. And so, that's where we need them to come in and talk about that.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said, Marie, and I just want to expand upon it a little bit. When Jara was hired, he was hired on a 4-3 vote, and it wasn't the first ballot. I think it was the second ballot, right? And he's never been able to maintain more than that kind of margin of support on the board of trustees. And in terms of his relationships with stakeholders, it's been spotty. So we've been, basically in conflict with this guy for a year, but there wasn't too long ago where the principals union was going after him, calling for him to be fired, removed or whatever. The support staff had issues with him, right? And then I don't know how many times in the community different stakeholders had issues. So here you have a leader of the school district that never has been able to really build consensus, right? Whether it's among governance, whether it's among the employee groups or members of the community. And so, during the pandemic, when it's safe to say we're in a real crisis, right? We had 100,000 kids where we had to teach remotely, and they didn't even have a device, let alone have access to get online, right? And so you describe it as a coup d'etat, an attempt to get rid of him, and I totally agree with that. And what we had was the same thing we're seeing now, a dysfunctional school board.
Absolutely.
Making the wrong decisions, right, for the wrong reasons. And at that time, the efforts led to get rid of him were led by the most wackiest faction on the school board, with no plan, in the middle of a pandemic to create all this instability for our students and our staff, because they simply didn't, like him or get along with him.
Right.
And then you fast forward today, and you have, the same type of approach by these school board trustees that are essentially trying to not just defend status quo, but perpetuate it by allowing him to determine who his replacement is at a price tag of $500,000.
And I just think that's pretty, I'll use the word silly as a kindergarten teacher. The man who has failed leadership and failed over, the 300,000 plus students and the 18,000 plus educators, why do you get to choose? Because I'm sorry, we have not had good leadership there. And so you get to make that choice, and the ultimate choice. I think that's a terrible idea. When we talk about that too, what is behind this? You were talking about that exit strategy, John. What is there something bigger that's behind this exit strategy? I call it an exit strategy, but what's behind the case that all of a sudden this has come up to?
I think there's multiple things. The pressure is on the superintendent to hit the road.
Right.
I think he sees it coming. He sees that he's being investigated for a number of things. He is failing our students, everything from not being transparent about issues that should be a non-issue. The Durango incident, for instance, that should have been a non-issue. He should have been forthcoming with that and shared that information. It shouldn't have taken a year for that. Same thing with his Twitter account information. There's just one thing after another that's happening. And John, I know there's something you want to speak to about as well, that, why is he all of a sudden, packing his bags and leaving? It's certainly not because he wants to do the right thing by CCSD. I think that, he's taking care of himself. He's out for number one.
Well, I think there's two things that are imminent, right? One, Marie, you should speak to that. I think you should share with the viewership a little bit more about this Twitter issue, right?
Oh, yes.
But before you do that, I mean, if folks look at the press lately, particularly today, February 2nd, a story broke that essentially is saying that the school district's going to be investigated by the federal government as to whether or not they misused ESSER dollars for these vacation junkets that they called recruitment trips that landed in Miami Beach on July 4th or Waikiki Beach in Hawaii on a holiday and recruited nobody. But in essence, they spent $150,000 of ESSER dollars taking, dozens of administrators and central staff to go look for people when in fact it sounded like it was a vacation junket for them. So now the story is broke that they're being investigated for potentially misusing ESSER dollars. So there's no way that this superintendent did not know about this. And more concerning is the people that are making a decision next Wednesday, these trustees, they have been asked by the public about these, and they have gone radio silent, refusing to answer. Yep. So that's one big thing, and I think you should speak and share a little bit more about the so-called Twitter
scandal. The scandal.
Yes, the scandal. Well, clearly, once we broke our working relationship with him, and it was not unbeknownst to the trustees. I met, the 4 votes between John and I, we met with each of them to discuss our history of how we ended up here, why we ended up here, and why we no longer had faith in him. And clearly there were hiccups the entire time he was here. But again, when we're trying to look at the overall picture of dealing with the crisis that we were dealing with at that moment, it wasn't the time. Like to John's point, we had a dysfunctional board then, so why would we allow them to be the ones to make that decision? Because they clearly had their own issues. So, fast forward to now where we had our battle with the superintendent over our contract. And there shouldn't have been a battle. At the end of the day, we should have settled this, and every educator should have had a contract by the start of the school year. We started in March, and we went full circle back to exactly what we put on the table. That was ridiculous. So what you saw in Superintendent Jara is the pressure was starting to build. You had the community, you had stakeholders, you had legislators saying enough, he needs to go, he's ineffective, he's causing harm to our students. And so I think his defense mechanism started, and he started attacking. We started tracking this Luis account. We had a staffer start tracking it immediately, and it just seemed really suspicious that anyone who spoke out against the district, specifically Superintendent Jara, that account, that Luis account, the burner account, would start pushing back and attacking whether it was Speaker Yeager or any legislator or anybody who spoke out against him. And that was one of the first things I do in the morning, check the news, see what's happening, what's broken over the evening. Same with our Vice President-elect, Kenny Belknap. And I'm looking through Twitter and I'm looking at things, and he immediately sends me this image. And I jumped out of bed, and I was so angry and not shocked. I honestly was not shocked.
Right.
I think that he was at his wit's end, and he makes a misogynistic comment about John and I. And I really think it was meant to be put in under that burner account.
Oh, my goodness.
And I think he accidentally did it under his own account. And so, of course, I immediately reached out to President Evelyn Garcia Morales and the other trustees, thinking that they were going to look into it, to do their due diligence, to do their job that they were elected to do. But no, they didn't. They brushed me off and said, no, Superintendent Jara says it was hacked. And so what, you just believe him without investigating it? How dare you? And then Lola Brooks with her condescending comments to, here's the advice I give you, Marie, that I give children, stay off of social media. How dare you not hold your one employee accountable? And that just goes back to this idea that trustees need to have a minimum qualifications to serve on that board, because you're making decisions that impact the lives of our students as well as our staff, and they're clearly not qualified. So I think it's just one more nail in his coffin, and I think we're going to continue seeing that. And I feel like the pressure of all of this has gotten to Superintendent Jara, and that's why he's leaving.
Yeah. I think you were kind to Garcia Morales. I think her response to you was, "Don't contact me anymore."
Oh, that's right. Yes, she because we're in negotiations. I've told you more than once, do not contact me again. I'm sorry. I'm a voter. I pay taxes.
Absolutely.
You're an elected official. I have the right to contact you, not only as an educator of CCSD, but as a taxpayer. And so that response is very unprofessional from her end as well.
So we filed a lawsuit, right? And we filed a lawsuit alleging, right, that in fact Jara and or possibly the communications guy over there, Todd Story.
Oh, Todd's story.
Used that burner account, Louise, and the Jara Twitter account to put out these attacks. Now, of course, as Marie said, their response was, well, the Jara account was hacked and the other account we have nothing to do with. But this is where the story gets really interesting, right? And this is why it's just inexcusable for these trustees to dismiss this from the word go. It gets interesting because beyond them saying, "Oh, it's not what you think it is," it's very easy for them to disprove that, right? By providing information. So we put in an information request and we said, "Okay, here's all the information we need, and if in fact," and Marie was very clear, if you were hacked and this happened, then it's not you, and then the story's over with.
Right.
And so they refused. Why don't you take it from me?
Correct. So they refused, and they said, that everything from the Twitter account is not subject to his employment. He's had that superintendent account on Twitter since he got here.
Right.
And him or his communications director would post things about happenings in CCSD. So for them to really say that doesn't go hand in hand, it does. At the end of the day, I'm an employee of CCSD.
That's right.
I'm currently on leave, but I'm an employee. And for the superintendent to make a comment like that, or somebody working directly for him, it's unacceptable. We are a profession that is predominantly women. And so to go to a board of women who cannot see how upsetting that is and who cannot see the urgent need to investigate him is just appalling.
So from no response from these trustees, radio silence, we had to go to court.
Yes.
And I think it's noteworthy for our listenership that we don't think it's coincidental that
Absolutely not.
what the court has ordered the superintendent of the district to provide and on what date. It's not coincidental in relation to this meeting they're having on February 7th. So you might speak to that.
Wow.
Well, and I agree. I think, the court date, or they mandated that he turn over the burner or his account information by February 7th. And now the trustees are meeting by February 5th is the deadline for them to turn over that information that our attorneys asked for. February 7th, the work session, they're going to discuss what kind of a package or deal they're going to give Superintendent Jara. And while I like to, my ego to say, yay, it was me, I'm the one who brought this man down, I think it's a culmination of a lot of things.
Right.
And being investigated by the FBI, wow, that's just one more thing, one more embarrassment for CCSD when we're in a moment of crisis where we need educators to come here to meet the need of our highest risk students.
Right.
And this is what you're getting from our superintendent.
Oh my
It's
goodness.
embarrassing.
It is embarrassing. Well, I can tell you personally that I have people reaching out from Western New York. They're like, what is going on out there? And if it's already going all the way to the East Coast from the West Coast, that's concerning. Also, I wanted to bring up the fact that, you talked about you're still an employee of CCSD, but just on leave as you serve, your presidency. I think it's interesting because technically, if it comes out that this was really, truly him that said these things, that's sexual harassment.
Absolutely.
And a predominantly, led district of, we're females. Like, that is so inappropriate, especially in today's world. Like, I look forward to seeing how this plays out. And nothing to you, Marie, as far as I'm sad that happened because you were a wonderful woman.
Thank you.
For your employer to speak ill of you, and also John, it's disgusting.
It absolutely is, and it's appalling. And as a woman, it is. It's in 2024. How
Yes.
dare someone, use that? Absolutely, the attacks that come to CCA or even me as a president, we get it. The criticisms or whatever.
Right.
But something that's this low,
Right.
it's ridiculous.
That's some low-hanging fruit.
So,
Sure.
but we're not the only ones that have come out and asked for his either resignation or termination, and we did that in January. And as Marie said, this was after we had discussions with him and these trustees to say, hey, we're getting all this money. You're going to do anything different? Because these outcomes, kids aren't learning. We got to change course. And they said, we're doing fine. And then we went public. But we're not the only ones. I mean, we've had some very prominent electeds that have come out and said that this guy should no longer be the superintendent. And
absolutely. And we've even had other unions. They've reached out to me via text or email and saying, what can we do? How can we help you? And the one thing I'll say is show up for the school board meeting. And if you're not able to show up, start writing those emails to those trustees. They need to hear from the community, because at the end of the day, those four are going to make a monumental decision that impacts the community, because our students are part of the community.
Wow.
so I think like the speaker
Right.
Of the Assembly, Yeager, and the Majority Leader, Canizero, they came out publicly. And I just got to think that if you're a school board trustee, let alone a superintendent, and you have the two highest legislative leaders in state government coming out saying, time's up, you need to move on, and you're not responding to it, then, that just speaks to the disconnect and the bubble that these guys are living in, right?
Absolutely.
Which fast forward us to next Wednesday, right? And I just want to say this. What we have called for is fire the guy or relieve him of his duty. Don't give him the money.
Right.
Don't allow him to handpick who his replacement's going to be, because it'll be a continuation of a failed leadership.
Yep.
Right? We have done that. We've also said wait for these investigations to come to fruition so that you can determine whether or not this guy engaged in things that were grounds for termination. And we've taken it a step further. We've said that's part one. And I want to say that because we have some elements of the community that have almost acquiesced to this construct, the way these trustees are framing it by saying, let's just let them go, and now let's talk about who's going to be the superintendent. And we think that's the worst thing that can happen. So we have to take care of part one. No money, you need to be relieved or fired or resign, and you're not going to be able to pick the replacement. But we've then said part two is, let's have a discussion. Let's learn from this.
Right.
What kind of qualifications, minimum qualifications we need for somebody to lead the fifth largest school district in this country. And then let's discuss a process that's transparent, that casts a wide net to try to find a replacement, and then, move decisions moving forward that's in the best interest of students and the 40,000 employees here. That's what we've advocated for.
Right.
And I want to say that because we have some folks out there now that we think they're enabling what the trustees and Jara has framed as a decision. Give me my exit and let's talk about Larsen Mitchell as a superintendent. And we think that's the worst thing that can happen.
Wow. And you talk about transparency, and when we were at that board meeting last Thursday, where we all came to talk about everything, that was one of the things that I heard, and a lot of the public comment about, and even the gentleman that was talking about the lack of evaluation on Jara when they were going through that.
What a joke that was.
Oh my goodness. But they were talking about the community does not trust our board of trustees because there is no transparency. So we need to make that what you're saying is especially about talking about what are the qualifications? What do we need to do? How do we cast that net? And if we don't do that and they just push Brenda Larsen Mitchell in there, then what? It's just the same story as it's been.
Let's talk about that. What do you both think? I mean, you're in the classroom now.
Right.
Marie, you got 30 years as a frontline educator. Let's just play this out. Let's say the trustees go along with the deal that Jara cooked. The four. Garcia Morales, Brooks, Bustamante Adams, and Williams. We're now calling the gang of four out, right? So let's just say the deal gets cut. What do you anticipate? What does the future look like? That there's this payoff, there's these pending investigations with no outcome yet, and then you got Larsen Mitchell running the school district. How do you see things playing out here?
I think part of it just continues the instability, because one of the things that we clearly negotiate are for benefits and pay for our educators, because at the core they need to be paid like professionals. But there's also this underlying the working condition issue.
Right.
And I hear it often when I go to schools and from educators that the policies that Dr. Larsen Mitchell rolled out with Superintendent Jara's, authority and permission negatively impacted some of our students and what our educators are doing. The rollout of the new curriculum and not enough training and things that just are implemented without a lot of thought. We had that built in place when we were working with Superintendent Jara, where we had little subcommittees that would meet with either Dr. Larsen Mitchell or the superintendent to say, you've tried this, but this is what it's looking like in reality, and this is why it's not working. But when it falls on deaf ears, that just continues this cycle of the working conditions are not improving, and our educators are stressed, and they leave the profession or they leave CCSD. So for me, again, I go back to, we want to recruit educators and retain educators, but are they willing to come to a three-ring circus? Because that's currently what we have in place. So, Kristan, I don't know, what are your thoughts? Because you're still in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you just said is absolutely accurate. I mean, it's a vicious cycle of, if they we'll call them the square. If they push, him out and bring Dr. Larsen Mitchell in, it's the same thing. And it sets the precedent for future situations. God forbid we ever have anything like this again, where it's so dysfunctional. But what does that teach any of us? I mean, we know what we want, but and it all starts from top down. I mean, this year alone has probably been, in my 10 years of teaching, the toughest year between the climate, the unrest with the contract, with me being taken out of a board meeting in cuffs from my employer. I mean, it's just everything that just rolls down. And so if we have terrible administration at top, then what?
So, but let's not talk about teachers. Let's talk about these kids.
That's a good point,
right?
too. Yeah.
So, Marie, you've said more than once, and I know, Kristan, you've spoken to this. We went practically most of this school year in this conflict.
Yes.
And the damage that had on students, their learning and whatnot. So what do we anticipate if there's a continuation of this, if the trustees get away with what they want to do, the 4 trustees, on Wednesday? I mean, I think this is what parents need to hear. What do we see the effect on students, not just the balance of this school year, but going into next school year? Or do we?
I think, like to your point earlier, John, it is a wasted school year, unfortunately, at least for the 30,000 students that didn't have an educator in front of them. And those effects are not just this year, they continue because they are behind. It's hard for the next year's teacher to catch up. So when we are burning our educators out because of policies that are created at the top,
right?
And Dr. Larsen Mitchell, that was her title, was over, I don't know the exact title, but she was over curriculum.
Right.
And when you're implementing policies that our educators are not able to successfully implement for whether it's because of lack of materials or lack of timing, whatever it is, it impacts each and every student, but more so in our most needy schools. And so I feel like those parents' voices are never heard. They're in survival mode, they're trying to make ends meet, and yet we as educators or the community need to make sure we're their voice. We need to make sure that we are showing up to that board meeting to share the concerns that we're hearing, not only from staff that we work with, but the parents whose voices may not be able to be there because they are working, because they are busy. They want their best for their child. And I've only taught at Title I at-risk schools, but how dare they have to get second, what's not best for them? How dare they not be able to have the ability to have the best education for those kids? Every child should have that, not just ones that live in Henderson or Summerlin.
So how does that play out for you?
Yeah.
If it's more of the same, how does that play out at Shore Elementary, your students and your colleagues' students?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can tell you, let's rewind a couple years back when we experienced, distance learning and the whole COVID pandemic. There's so many gaps from that right now. So then to fast forward to today, where we have all these failed policies, failed leadership, where, they're bringing out, HCM or HMH. I'm sorry, not HCM, HMH, where we were given no training to deliver this.
What is HMH?
Thank you for asking. Another wonderful acronym. So HMH is our new reading, writing, like our foundational program, right? So it's our new reading program, I guess you would call it. But this has been such a struggle to teach these kids because it's just all over the place. And so then again, now we fall behind. There's more gaps, there's more learning loss. And so just because my kids maybe come from, a more affluent area at Shore compared to, a child in, the urban core, which is, all these kids are going to learn, or their learning is just completely affected because of these failed policies. And that's really concerning. And, it's devastating. I can tell you, even my husband, Tony, he's doing his student teaching right now in 5th grade. And he's like, wow, babe, I've got I've got kids in our class that, they can't sound out words. They can't read. And I'm like, what? So that's concerning. So what happens? Do we just keep widening the gap? And that's what's going to happen if all hell breaks loose on the 7th. So
what are we asking parents to do?
We need them to make sure their voices are heard, because clearly parents are the most influential. That board of trustees, they don't listen to us. They don't listen to educators. It's clear in their demeanor and how they blow people off. But at the end of the day, parents are important. They're the ones who we work for.
Yeah.
That's who we have to be accountable to.
Yes.
And so they need to make sure that their voices are heard, whether it's through an email or showing up at that meeting. We all need to band together and ensure that the right process is put in place to pick the next superintendent. Because we can't continue on the same trajectory that we were under Superintendent Jara. It's much of the same. She has been his right-hand person all along, and the policies that they've created have caused harm to our district.
Wow, that's really scary.
Well, let me ask both of you. You guys have been involved in CCA's effort to move legislation up in Carson City and to get additional funding into the classroom and for educators. In fact, you guys were both very much involved in getting this SB 231 bill passed by the majority leader and co-sponsored by the speaker that allocated another $250 million for educators. I mean, we were the only organization, and you guys played a role in moving that to get that passed.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. In this moment, right, I'm going back to February 7th. What happens is Jara's deal gets passed by the Gang of Four. Is there a role for our state officials, our governor, in this matter? You, Marie, you have relationships with them. You talk to the governor frequently, as well as these leaders. You've engaged with them in the past as well.
Yeah.
Can you guys speak to that?
They absolutely have a vital role in fixing this process.
Yes.
Because if nothing else, this has not been a good year in CCSD. It's been many years of ups and downs under Superintendent Jara. But just in the last year, if this is not enough evidence for the governor and legislators to see how dysfunctional CCSD is, and at the core of that are these trustees, 4 of which control everything, and why there needs to be more accountability, I don't know what there is, because this is very apparent that there needs to be a change. There needs to be an immediate change where we have someone else, more grown-ups, to come in here and help us, because we're in a dire situation. This cannot continue. We cannot continue to have a rogue superintendent come in, try to put out policies, try to fix things, and then there's no accountability, because clearly those trustees are not willing to hold him accountable.
Yeah.
How about you, Kristan?
Oh, I feel the same way. I think there needs to be legislation passed to be able to hold these people accountable, because if anything, this year has proven more than anything that it is truly, what was you use a 3-ring circus. It truly is. I mean, you watch these women just bicker and go at each other, and then they don't even realize that they are Jara's boss. Like, at least when I'm watching it, they do not hold him accountable, and then yet everything he says, they're like, oh yes, okay, that's fine, we can do that. But there definitely needs to be, I mean, how would that work? I mean, would we, give our expertise and our information if passing legislation that we would like to see? Because, I mean, we're at the forefront of it.
I mean, I think anyone looking at this has to see there has to be minimum qualifications to be a superintendent. There has to be minimum qualifications to be a trustee, because, we've backed some candidates that we had hoped that, they were going to be the voice of reason, to go in there with a critical lens and look at things. And, you hope for the best, because people are who they are as far as what they tell you, and then you see the results and are very disappointed at the end. And we can't have a lot of the same. We can't continue to do it the same way. We need a better process.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're working on, and we've done this frequently in advance of a legislative session, is what kind of good legislation, good policy can the state legislature and the governor get behind that advances and improves public education, right? Because, this is a narrative that's playing out here that fuels this argument, well, let's just bust up this big school district. And clearly that's not the solution, at least from our perspective.
No.
Our solution is let's look at areas, pinch points, if you will, stress points that need to be fixed. So one of the things that we're working on right now is this concept of how do we advance student achievement, right? And so we've come up with there's 7 kind of stress points that need to be addressed in this upcoming ledge session. So the first one is this, what we call a structural disconnect with what the state passes in terms of money and legislation. And then when it gets to the school districts, if they don't comply with the legislation, if they don't use the money the way it's intended, there's nothing on the books that empowers the state to intervene and do a course correction, right? So we're looking at the first point that has to be addressed is that. Why? I think you wouldn't have seen a 10-month contract fight.
Right.
Absolutely.
I don't think you will see at all something that's going to be decided next Wednesday, February 7th, getting the light of day if the state had immediate intervention. So that's one area. The second area is to kind of like put a little more functionality to this current school board. They immediately tried to handcuff the 4 appointees by putting a muzzle on them, not allowing them to pass a motion. So the second thing we're looking at is how do we strengthen the governance model of school boards, and in this case, looks like we're going to be behind giving these guys the right to vote instead of taking that away from them, but giving it to them. And then the third point that we think needs to be addressed is as you said earlier, Marie, what's the minimum qualification for superintendent in all 17 school districts? If anybody takes a moment and just looks at what's on statute to be licensed to be a superintendent, not much. And then if you look at the profile of all these 17 school district superintendents, you're not going to walk away super impressed. But, it doesn't take much to become one. Right. It takes politics. The board hires somebody, right? So we want to, pass legislation that establishes a minimum standard of qualification before a board can hire somebody. And if they don't follow that minimum qualification, the state can intervene and prohibit them from hiring somebody. So that's like the third thing. The fourth thing we're looking at, particularly down here in Clark, is outcomes based at the school site, right? In Clark, principals have a great deal of autonomy. They control the budget, they control the plan to teach kids, but they're not really held to any kind of serious standard of, are you progressing? Are they learning how to read, write, do math, etc.? We think there has to be stronger accountability, starting with the leader in a building, right? The principal on outcomes, right? And then the next thing we think should be part of a change is some kind of guidelines around a staff model. Marie, you spoke yesterday at this press conference where these trustees want to give a $500,000 buyout to this superintendent, but at the same time, we have ESSER dollars sunsetting this school year, and mental health provisions in terms of staffing were funded by ESSER dollars are running out, and then there's no plan to replace that. That $500,000 could probably pay for 4 to 6 people. So what am I getting at? There's got to be guidelines that there has to be a minimum model of staffing at elementary, middle, and high school that's based on student needs, not something that's at the discretion simply of a principal, right?
Right.
And then the sixth thing that we're looking at is you're in the classroom now, you have 30 years time. Our evaluation system, which is supposed to provide resources, support, and improvement for you to be effective educators, is broke.
It is.
And we want to take a visit at it because we can't say the superintendent has to be held to a higher standard of accountability, a principal has to be held, without us looking in the mirror and saying we also need to have a standard of accountability, but not one that's punitive, one that is helpful and instructive for us, right? And then the last thing of our 7 points of change is how do we increase more instruction time for these kids and take the burden off of teachers of all this non-instruction time. I mean, you guys know this more than me, that they have. So you ask, what are some of the legislation Kristan, that's some of the stuff. Those are we're kind of working on right now.
Yeah. Well, and especially I like that we want to visit the evaluation. I want to circle back to that for a second because I know that I always have room to grow, and I'm not ashamed to say that because I want to be the best that I can be for my kids. And if I'm just getting an evaluation and it's just checking a box because, oh my God, we have to get this done by this date, how does that help me? And so when we go through these observations, they're like, oh, assign any PF indicators. What does that mean? What are you seeing if you're coming in here? And I'm not asking, administration to come in every month, twice a month, 3 times a month to, look for punitive things. But I'm asking if you see something that I could do better at, take those 100 strategists that you have in your building and help coach me. I'm fine. I don't care if I'm a 10-year veteran. I want to be better, and I know I can be. So what do you see that would bring me to a better place?
Kristan, I absolutely agree with you. I was waiting for John to finish about the evaluation piece.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it does start with the leader in that building. And
Yes.
I've worked for some great, strong administrators and some who weren't. I want feedback. I want to know, because every lesson I teach, I view it through a critical lens. What could I have done that was better? What could I have done to reach Johnny, who's really struggling?
Right.
I think good teachers do that. We self-evaluate on
do.
a daily basis. Do I need to reteach this concept? Because clearly my students didn't get it.
Right.
But when you go to the leader in the building, you want that leader to be able to give you feedback
Yes.
to how you can improve. And I've had some who really didn't have anything to say other than, oh, you're doing a great job, I'm moving on to someone else.
Right.
There is not one educator in this district who views themselves as perfect. We're always able to grow. We're always able to improve. And that's the feedback we want. We want to have a relationship with our building administrators that is productive, that is not punitive. And unfortunately, in some situations, an educator does feel fearful. That you don't want to admit, this is where I'm struggling.
Right.
Can I come and talk to you and you would give me some coaching advice or give me advice? And in some situations, we don't have that. And that's a shame, because I always wanted that. I wanted feedback that made me even better, year after year.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, that's why I like having student teachers as well, because I'm like, what did you think about that? And they're like, well, I don't really know, because I'm now like, no, be real honest. Do you think that went well? Did you see the kids engaged? And I like to get them thinking about that too, because I don't want them to think that, this is just, we're here, we're going to teach, but that's it. There's no feedback on anything. I mean, I'm still seeking as a 10-year veteran, so.
So back to next Wednesday, February 7th.
Yes.
I know that when we had our contract campaign, we had thousands and thousands of educators involved. We had students involved, right? We had hundreds of students at 6 different high schools. We had parents out there with us, right? So we started this podcast by talking about what's at stake on February 7th. I believe it's more than a crossroads. I think what we're witnessing is the collapse of school governance right now for a very bad deal that's being projected that's going to have consequences beyond this school year. So what kind of message are we asking of our members?
Yeah. Marie, you want to go first?
Yeah, for sure. I'm asking them to once again join us in the fight. We got a historic contract, because of your support. You were out there with us. You were making sure our voices were heard, regularly with all of the rallies. I attended probably close to 100% of the rallies that we had in the district. And so now I'm asking you once again to come and join us, to make sure that we are not brushed aside, that your voice is heard, that we are part of this decision that's monumental. So, Kristan, what are your thoughts?
I will say there's sometimes this misnomer across the district that the CCEA is the people over here on McLeod, right? And so I just want to make sure that everybody realizes my colleagues and we are the union. And so when I think we proved this contract fight, that when we organize and we're together in solidarity, I think people see that the changes that can be made. I mean, I think you threw out a fact of the contract that we got was the biggest contract in all of the United States. That's huge, right? And so that just goes, organizing is key. So I'd love to see everybody down there once again. This time Water Street, right, in Henderson. On February 7th. I'd like to see people sign up for public comment to, share their thoughts and their feelings on this, because it doesn't, even though it feels like it falls on deaf ears when it goes into the trustees, the community sees it, and that's huge too, because that's who you want to get. You want them behind us, and that's what I feel needs to happen. So make it happen. Come on down, 4:00. So as we end this juicy podcast of all kinds of great information that was carried here today, I want to say thank you to you two, because I know you two have been so busy, and I see you all over the TV. You guys are famous. I feel very honored to know famous people.
I'll give you my autograph.
That's right. So she's selling them $10. It's going back into the scholarship fund. No.
Yes, exactly. Great idea.
No, honestly, I mean, this is a really, really big thing that we have coming up February 7th, and it could really, change the trajectory of where we want to be as a district. And so I'm just, urging every single one of you, get out here, come out to the board or the work session, 4:00, Water Street, and just let your voices be heard. Because if not, and if it does go the direction which we don't need it to go, I'm scared for our students. I really am. I'm scared for our district, and this is the community I live in, this community I teach in, and I shouldn't be feeling that after, especially having such a victorious contract win. I should be having a pep in my step and ready to rock and roll. But just one more thing, right, guys?
Absolutely.
It is.
Oh, boy. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening again. I just wanted to ask all of you out there, too, in CCSD land, we do have a really good Instagram page that is up and running again. So please, please, please give that a follow. Again, I just appreciate all of you listening to this and letting me be your host to be able to guide us in our next big fight. And again, my name is Kristan Nigro as your host, signing off. Thank you.